This conference will now be recorded.
In yesterday's session, we were discussing about variables, right? Input variables, how to define variables using variable block, and how to assign the variables when it is prompted. When it is prompted, how to assign a variables or the values to that variables, and how to define the default values for that variables we have discussed, and also how to assign values using CLI option. We have used one option, CLI option, that is -var option. So using CLI option, we are able to pass the, or we are able to assign the, or we are able to override the default values. We are able to override the default values using -var option. And there are multiple ways. We'll slowly understand one after the other. You no need to use all the ways. You no need to assign the values to the variables using all these ways. Whatever works for your use case, your requirement, you can use appropriate way. So definitely we are not going to assign the values when it is prompted, because that requires human intervention. You are not going to assign values when it is prompted. You can use the default values if required, even though you are not passing, even though you are not assigning the value, or right, it will use the default value whatever we have defined in the default value, right? Otherwise you can use -var command line option. Similarly we can use environment variables. Environment variables option. So that environment variable option also we can use the environment variable option. We can use using environment variable also you can assign. So there are other ways, as we already discussed. There are multiple ways for defining a variables. Terraform searches the environment of its own process for environment variable named tf_var followed by the name of the declared variable. So this can be helpful when running Terraform in automation. When you are running Terraform in automation, or when you are running the sequence of Terraform commands with same variables, right? You can export the environment variable followed by that variable name. Export tf_var_ followed by that variable name, and you can assign the value for the variables using this option also. So you can export the variable, the tf_var_ followed by that variable name and value like that. So you can use this way also to set the values to this variable. Just to give an example, I'm using MacBook also environment variable. Linux or Mac, we can use export to set the environment variables. Another operating system where environment variables are case sensitive, so Terraform matches the variable name exactly as given in the configuration. So the required environment variable name will be usually have a mix of upper and lower case letters. So you can use different way to set up in the Windows environment variable, not using export. Okay. Now since I am using Mac, or if you guys are using Windows, there is a different way to set the environment variables. We already discussed it. So here I can set something like this before running my Terraform script. So yesterday I have created some resources. But I have not destroyed that resources. Let me destroy and demonstrate using this environment variable option. So let me destroy these resources, whatever has been created. I went to that command prompt. So yesterday we have created some resources, but I'll destroy those before I explain this environment variable option. Now let's understand. I have defined a variable. I have defined a name. Variable name is this, and this is the default value. This is another variable name. This is the default value. Now, if required, you can we can assign the values to this variable using -var option. And now another option I am discussing, that is environment variable. You can first set environment variable like this. That environment variable name, it will be something like this. This is always you need to give something like this: tf underscore var underscore the variable name. Let's say as part of this, I want to pass this ec to count. Let's say I can say ec to count equals to 1 or 2 like this. And if you want to export one more, let's say value for this also, let's say availability zone, just to give an example, something like this. The default value I have given AP South 1A, but if required you can give AP South 1B also. This is another way. We already discussed this way: Terraform, plan, or apply. Whenever you execute a Terraform or plan or apply, we executed something like this: -var, something like this. We already discussed, right? Something like this: -var. This we already discussed. This is one way. This is one way. Now I am discussing, you can set something like this. You can set something like this. Then you can run Terraform plan or Terraform apply like this. So these values will be assigned to this variable internally by Terraform. This is using environment variable option. You need to export environment variable like this: tf underscore var underscore followed by your variable name and its value. Is everyone clear? Before I run this Terraform plan or Terraform apply like this, is everyone clear what do you mean by this? The another option, we can assign values to the variables. Is everyone clear? Second option, this one more option.
No, sir. Like the second option, I'm not getting properly.
You can assign the values to the variables using by exporting the environment variables. Simple. Here I am giving, right? You can set the value to the environment variable. I mean to say, you can set a value to this variable by exporting as an environment variable. You are assigning something like this. You are export. I hope you know environment variables, right? How to set environment variables. That's what we are doing. So you can assign a values. You can assign a values to the variable. Now this is my variable, right? Whatever I have highlighted here, is it a variable defined in a Terraform configuration? What is the default value I have assigned to that in my variable? 1. Now, am I overriding that default value? Can like this? Yes. So this is one more option. Earlier, what we have done? -var option. Now, instead of passing with the Terraform plan like this, Terraform apply like this. Did you guys practice all these things yesterday? First, whatever has been discussed yesterday, did you guys practice this? If yes, you are setting this option. Now I am saying another way. So before I plan or before I run Terraform configuration, I can assign the values to that variable by exporting it as an environment variable. Clear? How to export that as an environment variable? Always you need to use tf underscore var underscore your variable name and your value, whatever you want to do. Now even though here I have the default value as 1, now What will be the value if I run or apply after exporting these environment variables? The AEC to count will be 2. Clear? Is that clear? Now, let me show that. Let me show that. Now, I am not using -var option. I am not using -var option. I am just saying Terraform plan. Let me show you. I am using just Terraform plan. I am not using -var option. I am not using -var option. Now, is it using all those default values? AMI also? Is it using default value? Is availability zone is also default value? And a number of instances. How many resources it will create when I say Terraform apply like this? 1. It is using default values. Yesterday we discussed about this option. There is another way. What is that way? First you can set environment variables. There are other ways for defining a variables. Terraform searches the environment of its own process for environment variables named tf underscore var underscore followed by the name of the declared variable. This will be helpful when running a Terraform in automation. Now they are giving, you can do like this and you can plan or destroy or apply basically. Now let me tell you, I'm exporting, since I'm using Linux or Mac, I'm exporting a variable like this. I'm exporting a variable followed by their standards. Now, if required, I can override the default value for this one also like this. If required, you can export another variable also, whatever you want to set. Now I am not setting that AMI ID, that is fine, let's leave it. Now let me show Terraform plan. I'm just executing Terraform plan. Now you observe, I'm just executing Terraform plan. 2 resources to be created because EC to count I have given it as 2, and you observe the availability zone. Is it using the availability zone value whatever I have assigned by exporting it as an environment variable followed by that variable name equals to a value? Do you see? Is it taking this? Yes. Now I will apply. I'm just applying, but I am not using -var option. So this is another way to override the default values or assign the values to the variable. Yesterday we discussed first option, assign values when prompted. When prompted. Later, what we have done, set default values in a variable, block. Then what we have explained one more time, assign or override, I can say assign or override default values using command line option -var option like this. Now I am saying there is another way. Environment. So there are various ways to define values to the variables, right? Terraform searches the environment of its own process for environment variables named tf underscore var underscore followed by the name of the declared variable. This is what I am doing. Now. This option. Now, if you see, I set as an environment variable. Now I am executing Terraform apply. As per that values, Terraform apply. Let me say yes, sir. Let me say yes, or you can use auto approve also. As per that values, whatever I have set using environment, is it using those values to those variables by Terraform? You can see, right? Two instances are getting created as per this whatever variable values I have set in 1B availability zone. This is one more option. If required, you can set something like this also. The AMI ID also, if you want to set as per your requirement, you can set AMI ID variable like this, and whatever AMI ID you want to assign, right? That can be any AMI ID. But now I have not exported the environment variable for AMI ID. Is it using the default value for that AMI ID variable? Whatever I have set in the default, do you see? Is it using the default one only? Because here I have not exported this one. It is using default value. But if I would have exported something like this, let me show. Let me show. Let me take something else. Let me take something else. Now, if I export this one also, and again, if I say Terraform plan, since instances are created using default AMI, now is it going to destroy and recreate the instances using this AMI if I apply Terraform again after exporting this environment variable? Yes. Let me show that. I am exporting this environment variable, but resources has already created. Let me show Terraform plan. Terraform plan. Terraform plan. You can see 2 to destroy, 2 to add, because earlier it was using this value. Earlier it was using this value, AMI. Now it has to use this one because I have overridden the default value. Since it cannot do in place update, what it is going to do? It has to be replaced. So it is going to destroy and create. If I say Terraform apply, this is one way, another way of passing the values to variables. Hyphen auto approve. Is everyone clear? What do you mean by this option? Another option like this, environment variables. Clear, guys? You no need to use all these ways. Any one of the way, whatever it works for you. It is not like you need to use all these things. But I am explaining all the ways how you can pass values to the variables in the Terraform. Values to the variables using Terraform. Now let me destroy, once you understood the concept, let's destroy these resources. Let's destroy these resources. Now the resources has been updated or created as per your Terraform configurations and as per your values. As per your values or Terraform configurations, these resources got created or updated in the cloud. Now you can see it is using a different AMI. This AMI now. Now let me destroy. Once your practice is done, once you have understood the concept, you can destroy. Guys, I am explaining Terraform and I am explaining Terraform with the AWS provider and I'm explaining a variables concept. But don't think it will only for AWS provider. Can we use this variables concept, functions for each, count for any provider, for any resources? These variables, Terraform basically, with any provider, not only AWS. Yes. So this is a Terraform concept. It is not specific to AWS. You can use variables, you can use functions, whatever has been discussed so far, right? Don't think it is only for AWS. Suppose you are creating Azure virtual machines. Can instead of hard coding the values for Azure resources, the arguments value for Azure resources, I can define it as a variables and I can use that as a variables. I can pass that variables. You might be thinking this is only for AWS. It is not like that. I am explaining AWS concept. I am not explaining AWS concept. I am explaining Terraform concept. I am explaining Terraform here using AWS provider. Using AWS provider, right? Suppose you are using Azure. Suppose you are using Azure. Now you want to create some resources in Azure, right? You will write a Terraform configurations. You are going to use Azure provider, as I already told. You are going to use Azure provider, something like this, and you are going to configure that Azure provider, and you will create a resources. Suppose you have AKS, let me tell you, Kubernetes. Suppose you want to create Azure Kubernetes cluster, right? And you can use something like this. But here, instead of hard coding values, these values, these type of values, you can define it as a variable and you can pass this as a variables. You might be thinking this is only for AWS. No, you can refer variable here and you can define a variables and you can pass variables to the Terraform, whatever way I am explaining. Clear? Because people don't understand the concept, they will by heart the code. Variables I am explaining that can be applicable, that can be used, that concept can be used for any provider, for any resources you want to create. The variable, define the default values. As per your requirement, you can change the values at runtime also. Clear? Before I proceed, is everyone clear what I am trying to say here? Now let's understand another way. There is another way, one more way. We can pass values to the Terraform using tf-var files. There is another way we can pass using tf-var files. You can assign a values to the variables in one file called terraform.tfvars, using terraform.tfvars file. So one more way is there, right? So another way, like we discussed about CLI. Now in a .tf-var files, either specified on the command line or automatically loaded. We will understand what we mean by specified on the command line or automatically loaded. Let's understand this tf-var option. Now variable .tf files, to set a lot of variables, to set a lots of variables, let's say lot of values, to set a lot of values to the variables. Will it be convenient whether if I use this option? Suppose I have 100 different variables I want to set. Is this convenient, or is this is a convenient way? Understood what I am trying to say? I have 100 different variables in that Terraform code. I want to set a values to those 100 different variables. Is it a convenient using this -var option or export like this? Yes, understand what I am trying to say. Is it convenient? If I have 100 different variables I want to set, no, right? It is not going to be a convenient way. So in that case, if it is one or two values, I can set using -var option or using export option like that. But if there are 100 different values, there are lot of variables. There is a lot of variables to set a lots of values, to set a lot of variables. The more convenient way is to specify their values in a one file, variable definition file. Variable declaration is different, variable definition is different. So it can be a convenient way to specify their values in a variable definition file with a name, with a file name ending with .tfvars or .tfvars.json, and then specify that file on the command line using -var file option. So you can specify something like this. In that file, you can assign the values directly. You can assign the values. A variable definition files uses the same basic syntax as Terraform language files, but contains only variable name assignments. Only variable name assignments. Variable name value. Variable name value. In a .tfvar files, we call it as a variable definition files. As of now, do we have any variable definition file where we are assigning values to that variables like that here in this code? Here, no. Now if required, you can assign something like this: terraform dot tfvars. This has to be exactly like this: terraform dot tfvars. This is the default variable definition file. It will be automatically used. This is the default variable file. It will be automatically used, which means you can see here .tfvars, right? Then you can specify. But if it is something else, you need to specify like this. If file names are exactly terraform.tfvars or terraform.tfr, JSON, they will be automatically loaded. Terraform will automatically load the number of variable definition files if they are present like this, like this, like this. So this will be automatically loaded. You no need to use this -var option. If the Terraform variable definition files are having a different names, right? Then you need to use -var file option like that. -var file option like that. Now let me first explain. Terraform.tfvars. Here I can just assign the variable name and its value. Like variable name is AMI ID. Variable name is just AMI ID, and whatever value, the value whatever I want to set. Let's say I want to set let's say different AMI ID. Let's say I want to use maybe Ubuntu AMI ID. Let me say I can assign something like this. Then another variable, whatever you are referring, right? Whatever you have defined, EC2 instance count. I can say something like this 2, and I can say whatever availability zone. Let's say availability zone, whatever which I am referring, availability zone. I can say availability zone AP South 1B, whatever. If required, you can define more variables also. If required, you can define more variables. Let's say I don't want to hard code this t2.micro instance type also. You define one more variable. Instance something instance type like this, you set this is declaration, variable declaration. You are declaring a variable or you are defining a variable. So type string default value, whatever you want to give, t2.micro, something like this, and a description, whatever. Now this one you can refer in your code, something like this, where that instance type. Now if you are don't pass anything, the default value. If you don't pass anything, default value. And you can pass like this, but now I am explaining one more way, terraform.tf var file. So I can say here that variable name, the variable name, whatever I have created, the variable name whatever I have created, the name of the variable is instance type, and if required I can say t2.medium also, It is not, if I don't set like this, is it going to use the default value, whatever you have defined? Now EC2 count, I am not assigning any value. Since there is a default value, when I define that variable, is it going to use the default value for that EC2 count? Yes. Now I can set like this also. Now let me show you. I am not using any option, and let me exit this terminal because I have set environment variables, right? The environment variables are still there. So I close the terminal. And I am going to open that terminal again, because in the previous, I mean to say in that terminal, I have set the environment variables. So I close the terminal to make sure those environment variables are not there anymore. So let me see, echo $tf underscore var underscore EC2 count or whatever. I should not have any environment variable value. That's why I closed and opened the terminal. Now this is one more option. I have a terraform.tf vars where we are just assigning the values like this. Now let me show Terraform plan. Is it automatically loading the values from there? One second. Terraform.tf vars. One second. Something like this. It has to be in double quotes. String, it has to be double quote. Okay. In string, it has to be double quotes. So let me define like this. This is same format. Okay. So you have to have something like this. Now let me show Terraform plan. Now you see, is it using whatever I have defined in the Terraform tfvars file? You can see, right? Is it taking t2.medium? Is this a terraform.tfvar file is automatically loaded wherever I have my Terraform configurations? I have a file, terraform.tfvars file. Is it using this as an instance type? You can see here, t2.medium, which means in this code, I am referring instance type also as a variable. Now the value is this one, t2.medium. So the terraform.tfvar file is automatically loaded. Since the file name is like that, automatically it has loaded. Now it is using t2.medium, and you can see availability zone 1B and AMI ID, whatever I am passing in this tfvar files, in the terraform.tfvar files like that. terraform.tf var file like that, and it is using. Since I have not set the EC2 count, is it using the default value? Is it using the default value? Whatever we have defined here, 1. Yes. So is everyone clear? What is the another way? Another way to pass the values in a more convenient way? In a more convenient way, when you have to pass or you have to set lot of values. When you have to set lot of values. When you have to set lot of values, this is the more convenient way. And this, if this is the name, it will be automatically loaded, or this is the name, it will be automatically loaded. Let's say I have a file with a different name. Let's say I have a file with a different name. Let's say I'm renaming something like this. Rename, I'm saying something dev.tf-vars like that, just to give an example. Dev.tf-vars. Now I am using like this. Now when I say Terraform plan or Terraform apply, whatever it is it loading that file automatically here? Is it loading that file automatically here? You see, you observe the values. You observe the values. Is it loading that dev.tf-var files, and is it using that one? Observe here. Availability zone is AP South 1A. Instance type is t2.micro. AMI ID is this one, which means is it using this file? If the file name is this one, dev.tf-vars like that, is it using this file? Is it loading? Is Terraform is loading these variables? No. But if the file name is exactly like this, if the file name is exactly like this, terraform.tf-vars, if the file name is exactly like this, terraform.tf-vars, I'm just renaming that file. Now file name is terraform.tf-vars. Now when I am using that file, when I have a file with that name, is it loading that file? Is Terraform is loading the variables from that file automatically? Now you see the values and confirm. You no need to apply. You no need to apply, but you can see here itself. Do you see? Is it loading now when the file name is that? And AMI also. This is the default name. This is the default name. Terraform will automatically load the number of variable definition files if they are present, file named exactly terraform.tf-vars or terraform.tf-vars.json format also it will take. But if I have something like this, if I have something like this, it is not going to load automatically. It is not going to load automatically like this. But can I use this option -var-file option as they mentioned here to use that file? This is very, very important, because let me tell you, I want to create a resources for dev environment. I want to create a resources for prod environment. I want to create a resource for QA environment. Without duplicating your Terraform configurations, can I use a variables concept in my Terraform configurations, and can I have a different values for those variables for dev, QA, prod? And can I use those variables when I say Terraform apply -var dev.tf-vars? When I want to create a resources for QA, Terraform apply -var file QA.tf-vars like that, prod.tf-vars like that. Configuration is same, but can I use a different values for based on the environment also if required? Can we reuse the Terraform configurations using this variables concept, the more convenient way? Understood what I am trying to say here? This is very, very important. Instead of writing a different configurations for creating a resources in a Terraform for dev, QA, prod, you can reuse the same configurations by referring the variables, input variables, and by passing those input variables at runtime, whatever way. This is more convenient way. Clear how important it is, the variables, input variables? Now if I have file like this, it is not going to use automatically. It is not going to load automatically. But can I specify using -var file option? It is not using that tf-var files. It is not using the tf-var files. It is using the default values only, because the file name is something like this. Now if required, I can say -var file -var file, that file name, that variable file name. What is my variable file? I mean to say variable declaration name. Variable declaration, there is a difference between declaration and definition, like that. So here I am assigning a values, the variable file name dev.tfvars. So I can use something like this: -var file dev.tfvars. Since I am executing this Terraform command in this present working directory, and I have the file also in the same directory, present, the absolute, I am giving a relative path only, not absolute path. I am giving the relative path. In this folder where I am running a Terraform command, I have this file. So I am giving just relative path, not absolute path. Okay. Now if you see, when I use like this, is it using that file, even though it's not a default name? When I'm using this option, is it using that file now? You can see here, right? Is it using that file? By looking at values itself, you no need to apply. You no need to apply. When you plan itself, you will come to know. T2.medium, AP South 1B, the AMI, whatever I have set here. Now, if I apply also, it will be same. If I apply also, it will be same. But you have to use -apply like this. And if you want to auto approve, suppose you are doing some kind of automation, can I have something like this in my Jenkins or any pipeline also? Can I maintain these Terraform configurations in my SCM repository? Whenever there is a change in the Terraform configurations or values, can I run these type of things via pipelines also if required? Automation. Yes. Now let me do this. Now I am applying just for demonstration. Any advantage use case of variable block in Terraform dot? We are not using variable block. Are we using variable block here in the .tfvar file, first of all?
No, sir. I'm asking that variable block we are using, right, in that main.tf or main.tf and in Terraform.tf was. Is there any difference or advantage in that? Which cases we use this and that type of blocks? Just check.
This is your. Do you have a programmatic background knowledge? Do you know what do you mean by defining variable, assigning value to variable? Simple. Here, using this variable block, what you are doing? Are you assigning or defining? Simple, right? In shell script, you have done, or maybe in Jenkins also you have done. In Jenkins, you have done something like this. Just to give an example, this is what. This is what. Suppose you might have no Jenkins at least, right? Just to give an example, this is what. This is what. This is, you are defining a variable. Here you are assigning a value to that variable. While defining a variable, you can assign a default value. Just to give an example, you can assign a default value. You can assign a default value. When you are defining a variable, you can assign the default value. Now, if required, you can override the default value. Now, your variable block, this variable block is this. You are defining a variable, what type of variable it is, type, the default value, the description. Now this is the default value, right? Now in this Terraform this tfvars file, or where is that, we have used renamed that one, right? Dev.tfvars. Now what is this? What is this? You defined, let me take all these things. This is how you have done, and here you have done something else. What do you mean by this now? Now this is what you have in the terraform.tfvars file. What is this? You are assigning a value to that variable. Here you have defined a variable. Clear? Without defining, can I assign or can I use? Simple. You take shell script also, Balaji. Variables concept. You take variables concept, shell script also. Without defining a variable, can you refer the variable or assign the value to that variable? Simple. I hope you know Terraform. Forget about Terraform. I hope you know shell script also, right? So okay, what about Jenkins? Do you have a Jenkins, at least Groovy scripting knowledge background? Jenkins also you have a variables, right? So this is you are defining, and here you are assigning. Okay, that is what there is. Both are two different things, not same. Clear? Now if this is the file, you need to use -var file option. But if you have a file with this name, if you have a file with this name, either this name or this name automatically loaded. Again, any file with this .auto tfvars, again any file with the name, the file name can be anything. If this is like this .auto.tfvars, then .auto.tfvars, then automatically it will be loaded, guys. Now if the extension is .auto.tfvars, that file name can be anything, it will be automatically loaded. If I give something like this, let me rename. Even though this is different name, but there is a .auto.tfvars. .auto.tfvars. Now this is the case. Even though if I say Terraform plan without passing that value, that -var file option, is it automatically loading even though the file name is different? Yes, right? Because there is no changes, in that values. There is no changes in that values. That's why it is saying your infrastructure is up to date. But now let me say, now I am saying t2.micro. I updated my value for this variable. Now file name is this dev.auto.tfvars. Let me say Terraform plan. Even though I am not using -var option, is that file is automatically loaded? Is that file is automatically loaded, and is it comparing? Like now the value is t2.micro. You already created a server using t2.medium. If you apply like this, it has to change. So it will do in place update. In place update in the sense, it will stop the server, it will change the instance type, and it will start the server. But is it going to terminate and create a new server? No. But since the file name is this, is it automatically loading the file .auto.tfvars like that? Is everyone clear? One more option. This, what do you mean by this? variable definition file. Any questions, any confusions here? This is one more option. This is one more option. This is one more option. Now, what is the precedence, variable precedence? Because you can pass variables multiple ways, right? What is the variable precedence and how to use the complex variables? So far I have explained only primitive types. So far I have explained only primitive types like numbers, strings only. But we have a lot of complex types we can use, like a list, maps, objects, and also variable precedence. Precedence in the sense, I have something like this. I have something like this. Now at runtime, I am passing again different value. Which one will take the precedence? I already have this var file, .tf var files, and I am setting some environment variable, or I am using -var option again. Which one will take the precedence? That variable precedence and how to use the complex variables, I will continue in the next session, that is Monday. But try to practice whatever has been discussed so far. So we discussed simple variables only. We discussed simple variables only, like primitive variables only, primitive variables, and there are different ways. Assign when it is prompted, use var CLI option, -var CLI option, like that. Then we discussed one more option. Assign when values is prompted, set the default values in variable block, assign or override default values using command line -var option, environment variable option. One more option what we discussed, this is variable definition files, .tf. And as I already told, Terraform will automatically load the number of definition files, variable definition files, if the file name is exactly this terraform.tfvars or terraform.tfvars.json, or any files with the name ending with this name also, it will be automatically loaded. But if you have a file with a different name, if you have a file with a different name, what option you can use when you are planning, when you are applying, what option you can use? If you have a Terraform definition file, variable definition file with a different name, not with this name, or it is not ending with the auto.tfvars, what option? I also explained that one also here itself, hyphen var hyphen file option. So try to practice whatever has been discussed. What is complex types, like what do you mean by list, map, object, and also the variable precedence. The variable precedence in Terraform also we'll discuss in the next sessions, that is from Monday. Any questions, any queries before I stop the session? Just one more suggestion what I want to explain here. So to better maintain proper, you write a Terraform code using some best practices. Now Terraform related settings, Terraform configurations or Terraform settings we have defined in the one file called terraform.tf file. Similarly, can I have a separate file where I can define the variables? Something like this, I can take it away, all these things here. From this, I can take it away. I can create one file, variables.tf, just variables.tf. Here, I can have all the variables. Variable, I mean to say I'm defining the variable, and I am Terraform configurations in separate file, Terraform settings, I can say, Terraform block and provider block, this Terraform settings in a separate file, variable definitions, I mean to say you are defining a variable in a separate file, and you can use some file like this, Terraform variable definition file, and your resources, only resources, whatever resources you want to create, those resources only, those resources only in this file like that. So do you have a better maintenance, code maintenance also, if you have something like this? Variable definitions in a separate file, Terraform related configurations, required providers and provider configurations in a separate file, variable definitions in a separate file, assigning the values to that variable in a separate file. This is .tf-vars. It has to end with the .tf-vars, or it has to end with the .auto.tf-vars. And your resources in a separate file. Your resources in a separate file. Like this also you can maintain. So to have a better readability, better maintenance, Terraform code readability maintenance also like this. Guys, I'm just taking into separate files, but is the behavior of Terraform is different now? Whether I apply, whether I destroy, is Terraform is behaving differently? No. But will I have a better maintenance, code maintenance, readability? Suppose you want to create a new variable. Can I go under directly? Can I go on variables file? Can I create a new variable, or can I change the default value to that variable? Or if I want to create a new variable, I can go and add a new variable block here. And if I want to assign the value to that, can I go and add in this file like that? If I want to modify any resources, I can do like this. To have a better readability and a better maintenance, code maintenance. If you have a something like this, variable definitions in a separate file, variable declarations in a separate file, your resources in a separate file, the Terraform settings in a separate file like that. Yes, this is a best practices. This is a best practice. But if I keep everything in a single, let's take this one also to here itself. Let's take this one also to here itself. It will work. Let's take this variable definitions also to same file. It will work. It will work. But this has to be a separate .tf-vars. Now, even though I don't have these two files, it will still work. But instead of having like this, better to maintain in a separate files. In a separate files, it can be any name. It can be any name. For naming convention, I'm using terraform.tf. For variables definitions, I'm using variables.tf like that. Variables.tf like that. Variables.tf like that. And this no need to be always main.tf. This no need to be always main.tf. It is like a main function. This is what you are actually managing using Terraform. That's why we are giving like main.tf. This can be anything again. This file name can be anything again, but this is like a main component in Terraform. That's why we are giving a name like this, main.tf. Is everyone clear? The organizing your Terraform configurations in a proper way, variables in a separate file, variable definitions in a separate file, assigning a values to that variables in a separate file, Terraform related configurations and provider related configurations in a separate file, and your resources in a separate file. This is a best practice. That's it. Nothing else. Any questions, any queries before I stop the session? If not, try to practice whatever has been discussed. Next week I will continue with variables only, complex type and precedence, variable precedence, and how it works. Okay. Thank you guys. That's it for today. I'll continue on Monday.